If you think female desire is just about love, affection, and connection, you've been lied to. There's a hidden side to it, silent, unconscious, and far more powerful than anyone ever told you. Because what women desire and what they show are not always the same. And this gap between what's spoken and what's hidden is exactly where confusion, pain, and obsession are born. But here's the cruel truth. You were never supposed to figure this out. Society, culture, even your own mind were designed to keep you blind to how this really works. Today we expose it. This is not about blame, not about hate. It's about decoding the unconscious through the psychological lens of Carl Jung, and finally understanding the part of female desire they hoped you'd never discover. Most men walk through life believing that female desire is simple: affection, kindness, connection, love. If you give her what she wants, if you show her loyalty, presence, attention, she'll stay. She'll choose you. She'll love you the way you love her. That's the first illusion. And it's the most dangerous one. Because female desire doesn't operate at the surface level of logic. It's not about what's rational, reasonable, or fair. It doesn't respond to the same inputs that male desire does. It's governed by something much older, something far more primal, and something deeply unconscious. Carl Jung spent his entire career studying the layers beneath the conscious mind, the hidden drivers of human behavior. And what he found is that most of what we believe about ourselves isn't actually chosen. It's a program, a script, an unconscious pattern passed down through generations, shaped by archetypes, instincts, and psychological forces we rarely notice, but that control everything. And female desire is no exception. It's not what you think, because it's not designed to be consciously understood. It's instinctive. It's chaotic. It's built around polarity, tension, mystery, and power dynamics that have existed since the beginning of humanity. This is why so many men fall into the same trap over and over again, believing that being good, kind, and available is the key to being wanted. But the brutal truth is, those things aren't what activate desire at a deep psychological level. In fact, sometimes they do the opposite. You've probably felt it. The confusion. The moment when everything was perfect, and then suddenly, it wasn't. The warmth turned cold. The connection turned distant. The attention faded, and you were left spiraling, wondering what you did wrong. But it wasn't about what you did. It was about what you didn't understand. Because female desire lives in the unconscious. And the unconscious doesn't crave safety. It craves polarity. It craves tension. It craves the unresolved, the energy between presence and absence, certainty and mystery, availability and distance. This doesn't mean women are manipulative or cruel. It means they are operating, just like you, under unconscious psychological forces they themselves often don't fully understand. This is what Jung called the shadow, the hidden parts of the psyche that influence behavior from the dark. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. Desire isn't rooted in comfort. It's rooted in tension. This is why being the nice guy rarely works. This is why unconditional availability often backfires. This is why the man who withholds, who remains slightly out of reach, often triggers far more emotional obsession than the one who constantly proves his devotion. It's not logical. It's psychological. It's archetypal. And it's not what you were taught to believe. If you don't understand this, you suffer. If you do, you start seeing the entire game with terrifying clarity. Let's be honest. The first emotion every man feels when confronted with the reality of female desire is confusion. One day, she's warm, affectionate, invested. The next, she's distant, cold, and detached. You replay every moment in your head, every word, every text, every glance, trying to figure out what changed. What did you do wrong? Why did she pull away? Why does it feel like something invisible just shifted? And now everything's different. This confusion is not an accident. It's not random. And it's not a mistake. It's the first trap. And it's designed by the unconscious mind. Not just hers, but yours. Carl Jung taught that the unconscious communicates through symbols, patterns, and emotions, not words. When something happens that your conscious mind can't logically explain, it triggers confusion. And that confusion acts like psychological quicksand. The more you fight it, the deeper you sink. But why does this confusion happen in the first place? Because the conscious story you've been told, that relationships are built on clear communication, honesty, consistency, and logic, doesn't match the unconscious reality of how desire actually works. At an unconscious level, female desire isn't linear. It's cyclical. It oscillates between closeness and distance, vulnerability and control, certainty and mystery. This is not manipulation. It's not cruelty. It's the natural dance of the unconscious seeking polarity, tension, and unresolved energy. And when you don't understand this dance, you get confused. You start overthinking. You start doubting yourself. You move from confident to anxious, from stable to insecure. And ironically, this is where the real damage begins. Because the moment you let confusion dictate your actions, you start chasing. You start proving. You start negotiating for attention. You start abandoning yourself to get closer to someone who, in that exact moment, feels like they're slipping away. And here's the cruel twist. The more you chase, the further they run. Not because they hate you, not because they don't care, but because the act of chasing collapses the polarity that fuels unconscious attraction. This is why the confusion is the first trap, because it's not just an emotional reaction, it's a doorway into your own shadow, into every wound you've carried about not being enough, about being abandoned, about being invisible. And when the unconscious senses that someone is willing to abandon themselves for the sake of closeness, it withdraws, not out of malice, but out of instinct, out of a need to preserve the tension that fuels desire. Jung would call this the collision between your conscious identity, the part of you that wants love, connection, and certainty, and your unconscious shadow, the part of you that carries every unmet need, every unresolved wound, every piece of your psyche you've tried to ignore. When this happens, confusion isn't the enemy. It's the signal that the game has shifted, that the dynamic has entered the unconscious, and that unless you understand what's happening at this level, you will lose yourself inside it. The only way out is through awareness, through understanding how the unconscious shapes desire, hers and yours. Because once you see the pattern, the confusion loses its power, and the game stops being a mystery. There's something deeply unsettling, almost cruel, about the way absence can suddenly appear in female desire. You feel it. One day you're seen, heard, validated. The next, it's silence, distance, coldness. At first it feels like punishment, like rejection. But what if it's not? What if this absence is power? Most men never understand this, because society teaches you that love is built on presence, on showing up, being available, proving loyalty. You were told that being constantly there is how you secure affection, how you maintain desire. But the unconscious, the place where real attraction is born, doesn't work like that. Carl Jung taught that the unconscious operates through tension, polarity, and unresolved energies. And absence creates the very tension that presence can never produce. It's the silence that makes you listen harder, the distance that makes you lean in, the withdrawal that makes you crave closeness. This is not about manipulation. It's an unconscious instinct, a psychological mechanism that maintains emotional charge within the dynamic. When she pulls away, something primal activates inside you. Your brain floods with questions. Your nervous system shifts into high alert. Why is she distant? What changed? How do I fix this? And here's the brutal reality. In that moment, she holds all the power. Not because she consciously planned it, but because absence triggers the most vulnerable parts of your psyche. Your attachment wounds, your fear of abandonment, your deep unconscious belief that if you're not constantly performing, you'll be left behind. The absence becomes a mirror. It forces you to confront how easily your self-worth collapses when it's not being externally validated. And from her side, whether she realizes it or not, this withdrawal maintains the very tension that sustains desire. If presence creates comfort, absence creates longing. This is why the man who is constantly available, always present, always texting, always proving, often feels his value erode over time. Because presence without tension collapses polarity. It's not the time together that creates obsession. It's the space between. Absence makes the unconscious mind project. It creates a vacuum where fantasy grows, where you imagine, wonder, obsess. And the more unanswered questions the unconscious has, the more powerful the emotional grip becomes. This is not a gendered strategy. It's an unconscious dynamic, one deeply rooted in the shadow of desire, in the dance between the known and the unknown, the seen and the unseen, the offered and the withheld. And the cruel truth? The more you try to close that gap by chasing, by demanding answers, by over-explaining yourself, the more the gap widens. Because desire doesn't live in certainty. It lives in mystery. Understanding this transforms everything. It stops being personal. It stops being about rejection. It starts being about recognizing the psychological forces at play, both in her and in you. Absence isn't the problem. It's the mechanism. It's how the unconscious maintains the tension that attraction feeds on. The man who understands this stops panicking in the face of distance. He stops chasing what withdraws. He becomes the one who understands the deeper game, the one who doesn't collapse when absence arrives because he knows. This is where the real power hides. If you've ever found yourself thinking, I thought this was real. I thought this was different. How did everything change so fast? You've experienced the illusion firsthand. It's the illusion that what was shown on the surface matched what existed underneath, that the affection was permanent, that the connection was unconditional, that the promises of closeness were guarantees. But here's the psychological truth. What you saw was only half the story. Carl Jung's work on the unconscious teaches that human beings are always wearing masks, what he called the persona. It's the version of ourselves that fits the situation, the role, the expectation. And in relationships, both men and women present personas, masks that reflect not just who they are, but who they think the other person wants them to be. In the beginning, the persona is perfect. She's attentive, affectionate, present. You feel seen in a way you haven't felt in years, maybe ever. But the unconscious doesn't maintain personas forever, because beneath the surface lives something far more powerful, the shadow. The shadow is the part of the psyche that holds everything repressed, unmet needs, hidden fears, suppressed desires. And while the persona tries to maintain the image of who we think we are, the shadow always finds a way to surface. This is why the initial warmth can turn cold, why presence becomes absence, why affection turns into distance. It's not because the feelings were fake. It's because the persona wasn't the whole story. And if you never understood this, you were destined to fall for the illusion. The unconscious doesn't operate on logic. It operates on cycles, on polarity, on the endless oscillation between connection and separation, closeness and withdrawal, certainty and doubt. You fell for the illusion because you believed what was being shown was the full truth. You mistook the light for the whole picture, forgetting that every light casts a shadow. This is not about blame. It's not about demonizing anyone. It's about understanding that human desire, especially female desire, is deeply entangled in unconscious dynamics that most people never learn to see. The illusion feels real because it is real, at the surface, but it was never the full truth. Beneath every "I miss you" was the shadow whispering, "but only on my terms." Beneath every "I want you" was an unspoken, "but only when the conditions in my unconscious are met." The man who doesn't understand this will always suffer. He'll believe that every withdrawal is personal, that every shift in energy is about something he did wrong, when in truth, it's the unconscious running its ancient psychological program. Once you see this, you stop begging for the persona to return. You stop trying to negotiate with the mask. You realize it was never about you personally. It was about the collision between your conscious expectations and the unconscious forces neither of you fully understood. The illusion was never meant to last. The lesson was always to see through it. If there's one truth most men never learn, it's this. Female desire doesn't only come from light, it also comes from the shadow. Carl Jung dedicated his life to teaching that every person, no matter how kind, sweet, or morally upright, carries a shadow, a hidden part of the psyche that holds everything they were told not to be, everything repressed, denied, and unlived. And this shadow doesn't just sit quietly in the background. It plays an active, often dominant role in shaping how we feel, how we behave, and crucially, how we desire. This is where most men get blindsided, because you were taught to look at women through the lens of their persona, the mask of kindness, softness, love, and warmth. You assumed that what she showed you was the full story. But no one told you that desire often emerges from the shadow, not the mask. The shadow holds the parts of her that crave what she can't admit, the impulses she won't speak out loud, the need for power, for tension, for dominance, for surrender, the part that loves the game, even while her conscious self claims to hate it. This is why it's possible for a woman to genuinely say, "I just want a nice guy, someone stable, someone consistent," and yet turn around and obsess over the one man who gives her none of those things. It's not hypocrisy. It's not manipulation. It's the unconscious at war with itself, the battle between her persona and her shadow. Jung warned that what's repressed doesn't go away. It controls from the dark. And in the realm of desire, this means the parts of herself she suppresses become the very engine of attraction. She may consciously believe she wants comfort, safety, certainty, but if her shadow craves tension, distance, the thrill of uncertainty, then that's where desire will flow. And here's the cruel reality for the man who doesn't understand this. The more you show up only as comfort, safety, and certainty, the more invisible you become to her unconscious. Because you are only speaking to the surface. You are feeding the persona, but starving the shadow. The man who understands this doesn't become cruel. He doesn't play games. He becomes conscious. He realizes that attraction isn't just about what's spoken, it's about what's unspoken. What lives in the dark. What's never said, but always felt. This is why the nice guy fails. Not because kindness is bad, but because he ignores the shadow. He shows up fully for the part of her that says she wants consistency, but neglects the part of her that unconsciously craves polarity, tension, and mystery. The shadow isn't evil. It's not something to fight. It's simply the unconscious demand for psychological wholeness. And until you understand the role of shadow in her desire, you will always feel like you're losing to something you can't see. One of the most painful moments in any relationship is the sudden shift. The warmth fades. The affection cools. The texts slow down. The tone changes. You wonder, why does it always feel like the moment I start caring more, she starts pulling away? It feels cruel. It feels confusing. But psychologically, it's not random. It's not personal. It's not even fully conscious. It's the shadow at work. It's the unconscious regulating attraction in a way most people never even realize. Carl Jung taught that the unconscious seeks balance, not comfort. And in the realm of desire, that balance often manifests as tension, as distance, as the push and pull dynamic that keeps energy flowing between two people. Withdrawal creates scarcity. Scarcity amplifies value. It forces the unconscious mind into a state of heightened alert, because the human psyche is wired to desire what feels scarce, uncertain, or just out of reach. When she withdraws, it activates your shadow, the part of you wired to fear abandonment, to crave validation, to seek closure. And in the same moment, it activates her own shadow, the part that unconsciously enjoys seeing how much influence she holds over your emotional state. This is not manipulation in the traditional sense. It's not always planned or deliberate. It's an instinctive, unconscious mechanism that maintains polarity, because the moment one person becomes fully available, fully present, fully certain, the unconscious starts looking for what's missing. If what's missing is tension, it creates it. If what's missing is distance, it enforces it. If what's missing is uncertainty, it manufactures it. This is why withdrawal works, whether it's conscious or unconscious. Because the human mind doesn't crave what's easily obtained. It craves what feels slightly out of reach. And here's the trap for most men. The more you panic in response to withdrawal, the deeper you fall into it. The more you chase, the more the distance grows. The more you try to force closeness, the more suffocating you become to the unconscious mind that now feels overwhelmed with certainty. The man who doesn't understand this pattern thinks something is wrong. He assumes he failed. He thinks he broke it. But the man who does understand this dynamic realizes this is the game the unconscious plays to maintain attraction. It doesn't mean you disappear. It doesn't mean you play childish games. It means you hold your ground. You become the source of your own psychological stability, not someone desperate to fix a dynamic that's unfolding exactly as the unconscious designed it. When you stop collapsing in the face of withdrawal, everything changes. The dynamic shifts. The tension reverses. The power resets. Because in that moment, you stop being someone begging for her attention. And you become someone the unconscious can no longer take for granted. Once you experience it, you start noticing it everywhere. The same dynamic, the same pattern, the same emotional roller coaster that feels impossible to escape. Closeness, followed by distance, warmth, followed by cold, attention, followed by silence. And you think it's just bad luck. Or maybe that it's just how she is. Or worse, that it's about you not being enough. But here's the uncomfortable truth Jung's psychology reveals. This is a loop, a psychological cycle, an unconscious pattern that runs until you become aware of it, or it ruins you. It starts innocent enough. You connect. You feel seen. Something about her feels different. You think, this time it's real. But then, the pattern begins. Subtly at first. A missed text. A colder tone. A shift in attention. Your mind scrambles to explain it. She must be busy. Maybe something's wrong. You double down. You show more affection, more effort, more availability. And that's when it tightens. The distance grows. The energy shifts. Suddenly, what felt natural starts to feel like work. You feel yourself slipping into anxiety, doubt, insecurity. You go from being the man she was drawn to the man chasing, proving, asking, "Are we okay?" And in that exact moment, you become invisible to her unconscious mind. Because here's the brutal reality. The unconscious punishes the collapse of polarity. When one side becomes too certain, too present, too available, the unconscious withdraws to restore tension. It's not evil. It's not manipulation. It's an instinctive mechanism designed to maintain emotional charge. And unless you understand this, you become stuck in the loop, constantly trying to recover the energy that the unconscious keeps dismantling. What's worse, every time the pattern repeats, it reinforces itself. You start believing, this is just how it is. I have to try harder. I have to fix this. And the more you try to fix it, the worse it gets. This is the psychological trap. The loop you didn't even know you were in. A loop designed not by her, but by the unconscious forces driving both of you. Here's the cruel paradox. The moment you stop trying to win her back is often the moment the dynamic flips. Because desire doesn't respond to effort. It responds to polarity. And polarity is restored not by doing more, but by doing less. By holding presence. By refusing to collapse. By understanding that the unconscious mind desires what it cannot fully possess. The man who sees the loop exits it. The man who doesn't repeats it. Again, and again, and again. At this point, there's one question burning in your mind. How do I get out of this? The answer isn't found in tactics, tricks, or manipulation. Jung's work shows that the real exit from the unconscious pattern is awareness, consciousness, integration. Because once you see how the game is played, not by her consciously, but by the unconscious forces shaping both of you, you are no longer a pawn inside it. You stop reacting. You stop overthinking. You stop collapsing every time the energy shifts. You realize her withdrawal isn't rejection. Her distance isn't abandonment. Her silence isn't punishment. It's the unconscious regulating the tension, and you no longer take it personally. This is where true power begins. When you stop being reactive to external shifts and become grounded in internal stability. The man who exits the loop doesn't do it by forcing her to change. He does it by refusing to betray himself. He holds presence even in the face of distance. He respects his own value even when attention is withdrawn. He stops proving, stops chasing, stops negotiating. Because he understands. Desire doesn't respond to proof. It responds to polarity. And polarity comes from knowing who you are, with or without her presence. This is how you escape. By breaking the agreement you unconsciously made, the one that said, "My worth depends on being chosen." The moment you dissolve that agreement, the game changes. You stop being the man who's waiting to be validated and become the man whose energy is no longer taken for granted. That's when the unconscious feels it. The shift, the tension flips, and the one who withdrew starts to lean back in. Not because of manipulation, not because you punished her, but because the polarity was restored. This is how you never get played again. Not because you control her behavior, but because you mastered your own energy. You stepped out of the unconscious loop and became conscious. And in that moment, you stopped chasing desire and became the one who commands it. And here's the cruel truth most will never tell you. The real battle was never about understanding her. It was about understanding yourself. About seeing how your unconscious mind has been quietly scripting every chase, every obsession, every collapse, long before you ever met her. Because when you learn to decode your own shadow, when you understand the unconscious forces that secretly run your life, you stop chasing clarity from others and start finding it inside. And this is exactly why I created an ebook that teaches you, step by step, how to turn this chaos into clarity, using the same psychological framework rooted in Jung's method. A 5-minute-a-day practice to move from confusion to emotional mastery. The link is in the comments. Because in the end, you were never chasing her. You were always chasing the parts of yourself that you abandoned to be chosen.